At times, when trying to import data into the 3D Experience platform, you may have seen this error message. You're not allowed to do this operation. Contact your administrator. In this presentation, I'll explain what this means, how to resolve it, and get into some of the details of 3D Experience Data Exchange. So for this presentation, I'm going to be using 2019X Cloud. I'm logged into my web browser here so I can access my dashboard and the web apps. And from here, I've already launched the Assembly Design native app on my desktop. So I'll just put this away, pull that up. Okay, so looking up in the top right corner of the application, I can see that I'm logged in and I'm currently in the import collaborative space. When I hover the mouse, I can see that my role is owner. If you don't want to stick around for the entire presentation, this can be a very short lesson. This is the reason why that error message comes up. There's more to go through here than just this setting, but if I simply want the error message to go away, then I just change my role to leader. And if I click the little pencil here, I can get the credentials dialog. And that gives me the opportunity to not only change my role, but I could change a collaborative space that I'm in. I'm going to actually leave that alone and change the role to leader. And I switch my role now. And when I go back to try to import, I will get the dialog box that I expect. There we are. So to get into a little more background on this topic, I'll cancel this and minimize the application and pull up the help documentation. I've got some tabs here that I would like to go through. There's a few comments in each one that I'd like to highlight. First one, this is the little summary of the collaborative spaces, and we see that it says collaborative spaces organize content to manage who can access that content and when users from other collaborative spaces can access the content. And something else to note, the collaborative space, not the user, owns content created in that space. The important message here is that collaborative spaces are not folders like you would get with Dropbox or Google Drive. They are a security mechanism which is fundamental to how 3D Experience controls visibility and access to the data that resides in the platform. Some refer to this as security context, which in simpler terms are the user login credentials. Three things contribute to this. First, the collaborative space itself, the access role, and the organization. There's a lot in the help documentation on collaborative spaces, and I encourage you to spend some time reviewing what's in here. But for this presentation, I only want to focus on what's relevant to the topic at hand, which is a data exchange. So that said, I'm going to switch to another section in the help docs. And on this page, we can see that the different access roles a user might have are listed, and they show a description of what is assigned to them. This table shows that there are two categories, either for design tasks or administrative tasks. These are different access rights, essentially read and write permissions. Under design, we see public reader, reader, contributor, author, and leader. Under administrative, there is owner and administrator. Note that each role adds additional permissions from the one listed before it. With that in mind, let's switch to a dashboard that I've created called Administration. This contains some of the web apps that I have access to as Platform Manager. In the Collaborative Spaces Configuration Center, which is down here on the bottom right, there is a section, I'll maximize this to make it easier to see. There is a section here called Exchange Management. Go ahead and select that. This lets me configure permissions for the data exchange services. Here we see that there are two entries for import. I can declare who can import 3D Experience data as new and who can import as reference. Just a quick note, the with or without mapping options are related to V5 Data Exchange. The roles that you see listed currently are the default out-of-box settings. As you can see, both author and leader are able to import as new, but only leader can import as ref. That's short for as reference. What we do not see here, nor do I have the ability to add, is the owner role. That's because data exchange is considered to be a design task, not an administrative task. So remember, these are two different categories according to the help documentation. Changing over to the Collaborative Spaces app, I'll put this away. Okay, I'll maximize that. And I've got several of these on this tenant, one of which is the common space, which is the default out-of-the-box space that all members belong to. Let's select Import and take a look at who belongs to this. Click the little information symbol. And I can see there's just myself in this collaborative space. Okay. So I have the access role of leader and owner. So if I were to add a new member here, I get three choices of role to assign to them. I have contributor, author, and leader and owner. So it's interesting here that leader and owner is a single role assignment for the platform manager, but for the user in the native app, they are two different roles that can be selected. Since I'm concerned with the exchange management capabilities of these roles, there is one more section of the help documentation that I'd like to review, and that is the exchange management access to content. So I'm going to cancel this and put this away. Pull up the help documentation again. And this provides a nice overview of the different capabilities of each role that is allowed to exchange data. Moving from top to bottom, we can see that the author role has the ability to import data as new, as well as the ability to export. The leader role can also import data as new, but it can also import as reference. I'm going to get into what both of those terms mean next. In order to do that, we'll switch back over to the native application. And here again, I'll first confirm that I have the proper access role, which should be the leader. Yeah, I do. And I'll take the opportunity once again to show that the leader and owner here are individually selectable. All right, now that I can import, let's take a look at the options available to me when doing that. So pull up the import dialog box again. The file format used by 3D Experience for native data exchange is 3D XML. This is a proprietary format developed by Dassault Systems. It's an XML-based container that functions like a zip file to capture all the representations, specifications, links, and associated objects that make up a product data set. When the 3D XML file is created, the decision can be made whether to allow authoring of the data contained within it. If the person that created the file chose not to allow this, then the only option available when opening it will be for review. So I'm going to pick a 3D XML that I know has been created to allow authoring. I have some different sources available to me. I want to select a file on disk. I'll pick that and then browse for the file. Okay. And when I do that, it switches to 3D XML with authoring. So now I have some options available to me in the General tab. By default, I have the box here checked next to as new, and it's suggesting to me a duplication string. This is something that can be changed in the system preferences. This is the out-of-the-box setting. It's basically a prefix that's going to be added to all the objects that are contained within that 3D XML. If I pick as reference, that field grays out, and then I get this additional selection in the middle that's offered to me of re-identification. So at this point, let's switch back over to the help documentation to explain what these options mean. Okay. First of all, I do want to point out that what I'm reviewing is referred to as the interactive command. You do have the ability to import 3D XMLs in batch, which is something that I'm not covering in this presentation, but it is fully documented. When importing data as new, this means that you're creating new objects as a copy of the originals. The important thing to note is that the receiving site takes ownership of those new objects. In a sense, the data is orphaned, so to speak, from the site in which they were created. When importing data as reference, this means that the ownership remains with the site that it was authored, and therefore the objects are not editable. It is possible to override this at the object level, however, with something called a delegation. In a collaborative environment, such as OEM and supplier, objects can receive automatic updates from the originating site. The re-identification is a way to resolve conflicts that may arise with things like the naming logic between originating and destination sites. Heading back to the native application, there is a function available called simulate. This gives me the opportunity to look into that 3D XML and check out its structure in table form. Scrolling down, you can see that there's several different objects that make up this product data. I can see that there are physical products, parts, representations, mechanisms, materials, and so on. So there's lots of different formats that can be inside a 3D XML. And this gives us the ability to preview their names and basic attributes. Across the top, we have the title, the name, revision, a couple of created and modified time date stamps, also the PLM maturity. Most of these are in work status, if not all of them, and the exchange status. Exchange status is something that is set by the publisher of the 3D XML on the originating site. It's possible to set certain objects to not be exchanged, for example, in the case of IP restriction. It's important to note that the simulate function is only available for 3D XMLs that have been published with the authoring option. So I'll close this. While I have this dialog open, point out a few more things here. First, the manifest, which indicates where the data is coming from and who it's intended for. These fields are editable during the export of the 3D XML. Also, there's an option to save a report, which is in HTML format and viewable in a web browser. These reports go into a location that's defined in the environment settings of the software. Finally, there's the 3D viewer. This is a really nice feature. This launches whatever application that you may have installed and associated to the 3D XML file format. Dassault publishes a 3D XML player for free on their website. As a matter of fact, I'll go search for it now. I'll just search for the 3D XML player. And it's the first result. Navigating to that page, this is where you can download the installer. Once you do this, this will be the application that the 3D viewer button on the import dialog box launches. Another free application that comes to mind that can open 3D XML files is eDrawings, also published by Dassault. Put this away. And so go ahead and click on this 3D viewer button, and when I do this, this file is going to come up in my player. Okay, this is a nice way to quickly be able to visualize the data before committing to the import, with the ability to rotate and pan and zoom just like you can in CATIA. as well as having access to the specification tree and the ability to print. All right, so put this away. So now it's time to import this 3D XML. I'll go ahead select as new. I'm going to go ahead and remove that duplication string. I don't need that in my my collaborative space that I'm importing into. And just click OK. Everything looks good here. And just wait for this to finish. Depending on how big this file is, it could take a few minutes. Okay, the status bar was on the other monitor. Okay, great. That finished up. And now we get something called the operation report. So in this report, move this over here. This gives us a little summary of what we've done here and what we imported. We've got confirmation that this was as new, no duplication string. Get the manifest information here, and again, that's where the report was written to. Something I want to point out on this report under objects, we have a list of the imported objects. We have an overall quantity here, just under 1,200 objects that were imported. And upon expanding this, there's several things listed. For anyone that's watching this video that might be in the developer community, these are the 6 core PLM objects that make up the 3D Experience data model. So I'm going to go back over to the web browser one last time here to illustrate this. I've already navigated to the section in the developer documentation that shows these objects in graphical form. So for anyone that's not familiar with what we're looking at here, this is the product. We've got the references, the instances, and 2 things that I want to point out. The connection is referring to engineering connections, and port is actually synonymous with publications. So knowing that, back over to the native app, we can see now that we have 99 publications that were in this data set. Okay, so green means we're good. It was successful. And if we wanted to, we could open up that report. And again, that opens up, it's HTML, it opens up in a web browser, and we get a little further detail on what's been imported into the database. Close this out. Okay, so I'll click OK to that. And finally, I want to look at importing one of these 3D XML files that has only been published for review. So close this, pull up the dialog again. I do have a file that I made myself, so I know that it was written for review. I'll browse to that. So notice that it says here in the format with authoring. Once I browse to that file that I know has only been created for review, notice that it changed. So it recognized that particular file is not an authoring 3D XML. So now I've got slightly different options here. Gone is that first tab. Now I only have the manifest and the report. So something else that's missing, that simulate capability. We do have the ability to still have the 3D viewer. So I just want to clarify here at the end that as review is different than as reference. So it's something that's optionally available with data in the authoring mode. That's the as reference. The purpose of importing that as reference data is to maintain ownership at the originating site that published the data. 3D XML for review imports data as read-only, which is to say that there is no intention to modify it. If that decision were to change from the originating site, then that data would have to be published out in another 3D XML that has been created with the authoring permission. So this concludes the presentation on 3D Experience Data Exchange. I hope it was useful to you. Thank you for listening and watching.